In over 30 years of living in Texas, I've become aware that Texas claims several well-known musicians. Bob Wills, Janis Joplin, Buddy Holly, Selena, Willie Nelson, Beyonce, Lyle Lovett, Kelly Clarkson, and many more. But it took a childhood friend from Iowa to introduce me to the Austin Lounge Lizards. Do any of you know their music? Well, my friend sent me a recording they refer to as a gospel song. Here's one of the verses. I'm going straight to heaven, boys, when I die, 'cause I've crossed every T and I've dotted every I. Why, my preacher tells me that I'm God's kind of guy. That's why Jesus loves me, but you're gonna fry. My friend thought I'd find the song funny, and I do. I also really enjoyed looking down on self-righteous people like that. You know the ones. They readily claim heaven for themselves because of how good they are. They also readily condemn others to hell. Eventually, I figured out that I was being self-righteous about not being self-righteous in their particular way. I could have easily adapted the prayer of the Pharisee in today's parable. God, I thank you that I am not like those self-righteous people that condemn others to hell. I see your grace, mercy, and love as much bigger than those people do. I go to a church that is open, affirming, and welcoming to all. Now, balance is important, so let me be clear. How we believe and act matters. I believe it's true that God's grace, mercy, and love encompass all God's children. I believe it's important to be part of a church that is open, affirming, and welcoming to all. Similarly, it's good that the Pharisee avoids stealing, being unjust, and committing adultery. It's good that he engages in spiritual practices such as fasting and giving 10% of his income. The Pharisee's problem and my problem is that the two of us think our beliefs and actions give us special favor with God. We don't always recognize that we too sin. We too need God's grace, mercy, and love. And we are quick to judge others. We sometimes are blind to the good that God has already brought about in others' lives. We tend to condemn them rather than pray for God's grace, mercy, and love to grow in their lives. So that song made me laugh, but it also made me start to come to grips with my tendency to be self-righteous. I noticed that it happened way too frequently. So one time I was talking to a trusted spiritual advisor about a person that I was judging at the time, like I had judged many others in the past. I'm going to call him Zeno. I had made some progress. I did not like that I was thinking of myself more highly than Zeno, but I couldn't seem to find a way past that attitude. My spiritual advisor told me about a practice explained by an Episcopal priest named Morton Kelsey in his book, Caring. She suggested that I try praying for Zeno with a familiar prayer, perhaps the Lord's Prayer. She said to me, try praying like this. Zeno's Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name by Zeno. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in Zeno's life as it is in heaven. Try that for a while and see what happens. Well, I have to admit I don't always take the advice of my spiritual advisor, but in this case I did. And I'm going to share with you what happened in my life. And my hope is that this advice might also help some of you. You'll see that I adapted the advice, and I'm expecting that you are likely to do that too, and perhaps in more substantial ways than I did. The first adaptation I made was to use the contemporary form of the Lord's Prayer, and from our class this morning, I know that would not be the choice of a lot of you, but it was my choice, because the older version seemed awkward to me when I was trying to make these changes. And I also had to figure out how often to say Zeno. I mean, you could throw it in there like 5 times a sentence, and how often to say he. So here's how I now start this adaptation of the Lord's Prayer. Zeno's Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done in Zeno's life as in heaven. So once I made that prayer more comfortable for my mind, I could start focusing on my attitude. I started praying like this on my morning walks and found changes in my attitude over time. For instance, I started thinking less about what bothered me about Zeno and more about the fact that Zeno is God's child. I started thinking less about Zeno's sins and more about the fact that I sinned against Zeno by my attitude. In fact, it wasn't long before I started to pray, my Father in heaven, before I prayed to Zeno's Father in heaven, because I realized that I need God's kingdom to come and God's will to be done in my life as much as Zeno does. I need God's daily provision as much as Zeno does. I need God's forgiveness, guidance, and protection as much as Zeno does. As my attitude changed, I started noticing gradual changes in my actions towards Zeno. I started interacting more easily with him. I started paying more attention to ways that Zeno serves God and the community. I started speaking more positively about him to others. I started expressing more appreciation to him. I started acting more empathetically toward him. I wish I could say that I stopped being self-righteous after a few weeks, but that's not true. It's been a while now, and I've added other names to this prayer practice. Being judgmental is a sin I intend to keep watching out for, but this way of praying has made it easier for me to notice when I'm being self-righteous. And this way of praying has changed my attitude and actions, one person at a time. I'd like to end with an insight from Søren Kierkegaard. He was a Lutheran theologian and philosopher from Denmark who wrote prolifically in the 1840s. At the age of 25, he came to the realization that at his core, he was a person found by God. After that realization, Kierkegaard spoke and wrote often about authenticity before God and about a life of constant transformation. And he saw prayer as an essential tool in that life. I especially like this quote. The function of prayer is not to influence God, but rather to change the nature of the person who prays. That's worth repeating. The function of prayer is not to influence God, but rather to change the nature of the person who prays. Wise words.